This shot of San Francisco was filmed 4 hours after sunrise. The sky was full of smoke from the massive wildfires that are now common in Western North America.
These fires are not your grandfather's fires. They're bigger, they're hotter, they're more powerful. Communities wiped down to ashes. That's what we're dealing with.
Last summer, Congress passed and Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, it's now law.
About 200 pages in, it pledges $1.8 billion to the Forest Service for hazardous fuels reduction. That just means removing trees and underbrush from forests so fires have less to feed on.
The $1.8 billion gives us more resources to reduce the intensity and risk associated with wildfire.
It's just not going to work. It's like, filling up your water pistol and squirting it into the ocean, thinking that's going to change the volume of the ocean.
Some ecologists are worried that the government is so focused on fuels reduction, they've lost sight of an important truth. To restore forests and protect people, the West needs more fire, not less.
It's changed a lot. I mean, there were always fires, there were always pretty big fires, and we would report on them, but it wasn't a season.
It takes a huge psychological toll on my patients to be stuck inside the house, to not be able to go outside and stay active.
We're surrounded by forests, and so there's actually nothing stopping fires from claiming our communities.
In 2020, we saw something like 1,000 families lost their homes. Devastation was everywhere.
The trends are all going in the same direction. The acres burned, the number of fires, the money spent fighting them. It's scary. It seems like there's more fire than ever before. But if you go back in history, you find something surprising. Wildfires were once even more common. The proof can be seen in tree rings. These dark notches are the scars of fires past, and we can see that they swept through this tree's forest every 20 years or so. Lightning regularly started fires, and so did people.
Native peoples had stewarded and cared for these lands for millennia. Their hard work and labor and scientific observation over time shaped our lands and landscapes.
When white folks invaded, they had different views on forests and fire.
In California specifically, the year 1850, one of the very first pieces of legislation was to not only remove fire as a stewardship tool, they're also removing indigenous peoples that held on to and carried forward those stewardship lessons. The goal of fire policy at that time was persistent no-burn policies.
The fledgling Forest Service vowed to spot every fire and put it out by 10 o'clock the next morning.
Joe, there's a fire down the valley. Get 100 boys organized and get down there at once.
Yes, sir.
Of course, this effort needed a mascot.
Smokey the Bear, Smokey the Bear, prowling and a-growling and a sniffing the air.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
Hello?
Hey there, the name's Hazy the skunk.
Where's Smokey?
Well, that guy gives the impression that all fire is bad. He's right that a healthy forest can look like this, but it can also look like this. After a fire, insects arrive to munch on burned trees, and the birds follow. Fire-adapted plants spring up, and deer graze in the newly formed meadows. These forests need fire to thrive. But under the watchful eye of the Forest Service,
fire became pretty rare. You can see it in the tree rings. There's this big pause. In the centuries before the Forest Service, fire season was driven by changes in drought and temperature. When it got hotter and drier, you'd expect to see more burning. Cooler and wetter, less burning. This line shows the amount of burning you'd predict based solely on climatic conditions, and evidence of actual past fires follows this line pretty well. When the climate starts to change, you'd expect more burning again, but we've actually seen a drop. We've got this huge deficit of fire. And it was when these lines diverged that things started changing for the worse. In the 1930s, the Forest Service took panoramas at a bunch of watchtowers, and in 2014, they asked photographer John Marshall to visit the exact same spots.
I became fascinated with the whole process. It's one of these kind of addictions. I'm hooked.
Vistas that once showed endless wilderness are now dotted with homes.
Now there's residential development right in the midst of this super dense forest, which is really scary.
In satellite photos, you can see neighborhoods pushing into forests. That means more people and infrastructure to spark fires, and more homes in the path of destruction. And the forest itself has changed.
What you see in the historic pictures is a very patchy landscape, which made habitats for all kinds of wildlife. And when you take fire away, the openings have just all grown in. It's all just all knitted into one amorphous forest.
Large fires can now burn continuously through these forests. 200 years ago, 300 years ago, fires were a lot more frequent and often less damaging.
Fire tended to stay near the ground, scarring big trees, but not killing them. But if so-called ladder fuels have time to grow, they can help fire leap into the canopy.
These days, we're getting a lot more of the signature of what we call high-severity fire, where most of the trees die.
It was a beautiful, beautiful forest, and now there's nary a tree to be seen over thousands of acres.
Fire reshapes America's forests, and so does logging. The Forest Service once sold a lot of trees to timber companies, and some of that revenue helped fund their firefighting. But they cut back on timber sales in the 90s.
This government has clamped down on our domestic production of timber off our forested lands. And meanwhile, wildfires ravage America's forests.
The timber industry and the politicians they donate to often proclaim that more logging will help protect communities from wildfire, but that argument doesn't really hold up. In 2013, the Douglas Complex fire burned across an almost perfect patchwork of federal land and commercial timber plantations. Later, a study found that the fires were more severe on commercial land. That might be because logging operations remove large, more fire-resistant trees and plant lots of smaller trees in their place. And they leave behind logging slash, which makes for perfect kindling. There are plenty of examples of severe fires spreading easily through areas that were heavily logged and then burning through communities. So if more logging isn't the solution, what is? The Forest Service and the Inflation Reduction Act are putting their money on hazardous fuels reduction. That's an umbrella term that covers a lot of different tools that foresters can use depending on the forest type and the weather and the terrain. The one that probably gets talked about the most is
thinning.
Thinning.
Very limited, targeted thinning and cleaning.
Thinning. Thinning is all about going in and dealing with these overstocked timber stands.
Cutting down small and medium trees to eliminate ladder fuels, to put more gaps in the canopy, or to create open spaces where firefighters can work.
There are a number of reservations about forest thinning. So first of all, is it a timber grab?
It sounds like it's a benign activity, thinning. They won't call it logging, but they'll pluck some of those large fire-resistant trees. In some places, they take a lot of them.
But that's just one potential problem with thinning.
Thinning on its own actually creates logging slash.
And that's your real kindling problem. They'll open up the overstory canopy to let more sunlight in. Then you increase the wind speeds that can go through the forest. You increase the drying out of the understory while it's coming back with more plants. You can actually increase all of the fire problems you're hoping to avoid.
But there is something that can help mitigate these problems with thinning: adding more fire.
It's really important to follow any forest thinning with prescribed burning.
I'm a very strong supporter of prescribed burns. Let's go in there and take care of this dead and dying material.
Give the forest a bath.
In 2014, the Carlton Complex fire burned through areas where foresters had tried different kinds of treatments, and Susan Pritchard went to see how well they worked. In some spots, most of the trees had died. In others, most had survived. Areas that had been thinned fell mostly in this range. They didn't fare very well. Areas with a prescribed burn through the understory did a little better. And here's the combo of thinning and burning. Areas recently burned by natural wildfire also saw less damage. Fire is the key ingredient, the thing that can make forests healthier and more resilient, the thing that might keep future wildfires from growing out of control. But that doesn't make it less scary.
I was afraid of fire. I had those feelings of uneasiness. So it's funny because now I'm the first one to step in and the first one to want to pick up a tool because I know all of the good that this is going to do. There's a lot of healing that happens. We're healing the landscapes with fire and thinking about the regenerative properties that it brings. And then I've heard it be called a reunification with our culture. We're finding our way back to it. So in 2022, Governor Gavin Newsom put a call out for more prescribed and controlled burns.
The state government that once outlawed burning is now asking tribes for help.
We got a lot of work to do breaking down that fear of fire, and that's across everyday people, communities, and agency members as well.
The fact is that these landscapes are fire adapted, and fire not only will occur in them, but needs to.
But it can be hard to practice what you preach. In the last decade in the West, the Forest Service thinned 6 million acres, but they only got around to burning 3 million. And they're also hesitant to let any natural wildfires run their course.
Wildfire management still includes a very heavy suppression effort. There is no let burn policy.
The Forest Service still does everything it can to stop all but 4% of fires. In the past, they've actually raided funds intended for thinning and burning to help pay for this immense firefighting effort, a practice known as fire borrowing.
We have put together legislation to end fire borrowing for good.
But even after Wyden's bill passed in 2018, it's still been hard to find enough labor to manage all the burns that are needed.
There have been instances where the conditions were just right, and we were ready to light the fire, but we didn't have enough personnel.
And there's another big challenge. Elected officials aren't always comfortable with the risk of unintended consequences. 99.84% of prescribed burns go exactly as planned, but then there's the other 0.16%.
How could a controlled burn get so out of control?
One of the two fires was purposely set as a prescribed burn.
The U.S. government is responsible in large part for this fire.
A Forest Service review found that drought conditions and slash left behind by thinning operations helped the fire explode out of control.
And that's why the Forest Service has just put a complete pause on prescribed burns.
That's the wrong approach. And yet the Forest Service faces that pressure all the time.
It's like a fiery version of the trolley problem. If we do nothing, huge fires coming down the line will do tremendous damage. Choosing to set prescribed fires has smaller risks, but it's still hard to flip that switch.
In some of the agencies, I think that risk of actually putting fire on the ground and knowing that something could possibly go wrong with it seems a lot more real than the inherent risk of keeping fire out of ecosystems.
I don't think at this point most members of Congress are very up on the new science in this area. You know, yes, you're going to have smoke, yes, you're going to have some risks, but people are going to see the promising results, and I think that will help us pick up substantial additional support.
We are living through the riskiest proposition of all, which is to do very little to get ahead of these wildfires. I'd actually really love to see, first and foremost, tribal and indigenous groups be empowered to make use of cultural burning more. I also really want to see trained prescribed fire crews.
I want us to have a workforce that's capable of taking those big assignments on.
That's certainly something that we appreciate the additional investment from the Inflation Reduction Act on. Additional crews have been hired, additional partners have been engaged.
Removing some of those barriers that are in policy and maybe within agencies to be able to hold more burns, I think is a starting point.
Whether or not federal funding translates to more flames on the ground, the West will have to get more comfortable living alongside wildfires.
We cannot stuff the wildfire genie back into the bottle. It's not going to happen.
we really need to ask ourselves, should we allow people to build just anywhere?
And where homes are already built,
we could be helping homeowners harden their houses, retrofitting roofs, fixing gutters, putting in more fire-resistant windows, siding.
What we're doing isn't working. So we gotta ask ourselves, what kind of fire are we gonna have in our future?
We have to move from being reactive towards wildfires and actually fight fire with fire.